Christ is arisen. Alleluia. It is Easter Sunday, and today we will be reading from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, and we will read from verse 1 through 32. But on the first day of the week at early dawn, they came to the tomb taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. Now on that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us? The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Let's imagine ourselves with the disciples on the first Easter Sunday. Here's what we heard. At dawn, before the sun had risen, some women who are part of our movement went to the tomb to properly wash Jesus' corpse and prepare it for burial. When they arrived, they had a vision involving angels. One of the women claimed that Jesus appeared to her. The rest of us think it was just the gardener. The gardener? What a place to be buried. A grave in a garden, a bed of death in a bed of life. The women came and told the disciples. Peter went running back and found the tomb empty. Empty. And the burial cloths were still there, neatly folded. Who would take a naked corpse and leave the bloody cloths that it was wrapped in? Peter wondered what was going on, but he didn't have any clear theory. We all speculated, but none of us knew what to think. We decided to go back home. That's where we are now, walking on the road back home. It's about a 7-mile walk to our little town of Emmaus. It takes a couple hours. Along the way, we've been talking about all this, trying to come up with some kind of interpretation of the events that have transpired. Now, we notice this other fellow walking toward us, a stranger. We lower our voices. He comes a little closer. "What are you folks talking about?" he asks. One of us replies, "Are you kidding? Are you the only person in this whole region who doesn't know all that's been happening around Jerusalem recently?" "Like what?" he asks. We tell him about Jesus, that he was clearly a prophet who said and did amazing things. We tell him how the religious and political leaders came together to arrest him. We go into some detail about the crucifixion on Friday. We had hoped, one of us says, and pauses. We had hoped that this Jesus was the one who was going to turn things around for Israel, that he would set us free from the Roman occupation. We walk on a few steps, and he adds, "And this morning was the 3rd day since his death, and some women from our group told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive." It's pretty clear from the tone of his voice that none of us take the report of the women very seriously. That's when the stranger interrupts. "You just don't get it, do you?" he says. "This is exactly what the prophets said would happen. They have been telling us all along that the liberator would have to suffer and die like this before entering his glory." As we continue walking, he starts explaining things to us from the scriptures. He begins with Moses, and step by step, he shows us the pattern of God's work in history, culminating in what happened in Jerusalem in recent days. God calls someone to proclaim God's will. Resistance and rejection follow, often culminating in an expulsion or murder to silence the speaker. But this isn't a sign of defeat. This is the only way God's most important messages are ever heard, through someone on the verge of being rejected. God's word doesn't come in dominating, crushing force. It comes only in vulnerability, in weakness, in gentleness, just as we have seen over this last week. At this point, we realize we've reached home already. As we slow down, the stranger just keeps walking. We plead with him to stay here with us since it's getting late and will soon be dark. So he comes in and we sit down at our little table for a meal. He reaches to the center of the table and takes a loaf of bread and gives thanks for it. He breaks it and hands a piece of it to each one of us, and it hits us at the same instant. This is not a stranger. It couldn't be. Yes, this is Jesus. We each look down at the fragment of bread in our hands, and when we look up to the stranger, he is gone. And we start talking, one interrupting the other. When he spoke about everything, about Moses and the prophets, did you feel inspired? Yes. It felt like my heart was glowing hotter and hotter until it was ready to ignite. Did this really happen, or was it just a vision? Just a vision. Maybe a vision means seeing into what's more real than anything else. But it wasn't just me, right? You saw him too, right? You felt it too, right? What do we do now? Shouldn't we tell the others? Yes, let's do it. Let's go back to Jerusalem, even though it's late. I could never sleep after experiencing this. So we pack our gear and rush back to the city, excited and breathless. On our earlier journey, we were filled with only one kind of perplexity: disappointment, confusion, sadness. Now we feel another kind of perplexity: wonder, awe, amazement, almost too good to be trueness. Do you realize what this means? One of us asks and then answers his own question. Jesus was right. After all, everything he stood for has been vindicated. Yes, and something else. We never have to fear death again. And if that's true, another answers, we never need to fear Caesar and his forces again either. Their only real weapon is fear, and if we lose our fear, what power do they have left? Death has lost its sting. That means we can stand tall and speak the truth just like Jesus did. We never need to fear anyone again. This changes everything. It's not just that Jesus was resurrected. It feels like we have arisen too. We were in a tomb of defeat and despair. But now, look at us. We're truly alive again. We talk as fast as we walk. We recall Jesus' words from Thursday night about his body and blood. We remember what happened on Friday when his body and his blood were separated from another on the cross. That's what crucifixion is, we realize. The slow, excruciating public separation of body and blood. So we wonder, could it be that in the holy meal, when we remember Jesus, we are making space for his body and blood to be reunited and reconstituted in us? Could our remembering him actually remember and resurrect him in our hearts, in our bodies, in our lives? Could his body and blood be reunited in us so that we become his new embodiment? Is that why we saw him and then didn't see him? Because the place he most wants to be seen is in our bodies, among us, in us. It's dark when we reach Jerusalem. Between this day's sunrise and today's sunset, our world has been changed forever. Everything is new. From now on, whenever we break the bread and drink the wine, we will know that we are not alone. The risen Christ is with us, among us, and within us, just as he was today, even though we didn't recognize him. Resurrection has begun. We are part of something rare, something precious, something utterly revolutionary. It feels like an uprising of hope, not hate, an uprising armed with love, not weapons, an uprising that shouts a joyful promise of life and peace, not angry threats of hostility and death. It's an uprising of outstretched hands, not clenched fists. It's the someday we have always dreamed of, emerging in the present, rising up among us and within us. It's so different from what we expected, so much better. This is what it means to be alive, truly alive. This is what it means to be en route, walking the road to a new and better day. Let's tell others, the Lord is risen. He is risen indeed. The Lord is risen. He is risen indeed. The Lord is risen. He is risen indeed.